So what we're hoping to do today is work through some of the changes for exams in summer 2020. What is advanced information? Where can you find it? And we'll look to address any questions you have. And I'll hand over to Katie in a minute. She'll talk you through the first part. Now I've got access to the screen, so I'll guide you through where to find it. If you've got any questions in the meantime, you can pop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on it. Otherwise, we'll open questions at the end. If you've got a question and you want to ask it, there's an option. If you click on participants, you've got an option to raise your hand. What was it? Clicking?
Click on the reactions.
Yeah, you can click on reactions and it will raise your hand, and we can see then who's waiting to ask something. If you prefer to pop them in chat, that's fine, and I'll keep an eye on it. So, hand over to you, Katie.
Okay.
Myself.
Give the next slide. There we are. So we're mostly going to be focusing on advanced information here because that's sort of the newest bit. But I wanted to put that into context a little bit, looking at all of the changes that we've got coming in this summer 22. And the first thing to say is that the changes that we're talking about here, they all apply to the off-qual regulated GCSEs A-levels. So those are the standard English ones. If they say GCSE, they're AQA, OCR, Edexcel, and EduCAS, WJEC EduCAS. Because those are all regulated by Ofqual, so they have the same sets of rules that they follow, and they're also known as the JCQ boards. So you'll see things from both Ofqual and JCQ. Now, there's also Edexcel International GCSEs, which obviously a lot of home educators do. They have pretty much followed exactly the same thing. So they're not regulated by Ofqual. They don't have to do the things the same, but in this case, they have chosen to. So pretty much everything we're talking about will be about Ofqual GCSEs, AS and A levels, and the Edexcel International GCSEs. It doesn't apply to Cambridge. So if you're doing a Cambridge IGCSE, that's effectively the same as normal this summer as it would be any other year. So you don't get advanced information, and they haven't done any cutting out of content in the same way. They've basically done it in a way that is unlikely to affect private candidates. And again, for the international A levels that Cambridge do, they haven't changed anything there either. And also, if you're doing the Welsh GCSEs, they've done things slightly differently. That probably doesn't affect most home educators because they're often ones that we can't use anyway. But just be aware that if it's the Welsh or the Northern Irish GCSEs that you're doing, they've got their own arrangements. So go off and look at the exam board websites to find out about those. Similarly, Scottish Nationals, they've done things slightly differently as well. So that's kind of the first caveat. And then looking at the changes we've got this summer. So the approach has been to sort of take a variety of different adaptations and apply them across the suite of GCSEs. And what GCSEs and A levels. And I mean, the DfE and Ofqual have basically come up with this plan that's happening this summer, and it's kind of been thought of with schools in mind. So that's why what they've done is they've made some changes to coursework, and that's mostly to account for times when you couldn't do coursework because of social distancing or schools being closed. And obviously, again, as home educators, we mostly can't do the coursework anyway, so that hasn't been a huge effect. One thing that might have helped is that sometimes things like the science practicals that normally you would have to do within a school or an exam centre, you've been able to do those just by watching them this year. So it's made some of those qualifications a little bit easier to access. And then there's been optional content that has been in history, geography, English literature, and ancient history GCSEs. And in each of those cases, essentially what they've done is they've taken out one of the units that you would normally be examined on, and this time it won't be in the exam. And that's sort of quite relevant to the advanced information, because where they've done that, they said that's enough of an adaptation for that subject. So subjects that have had some content taken out and that won't be examined on don't get any advanced information. You get one or the other. And they've sort of picked those subjects because they're quite content heavy, and because in a school situation, most students would be taking English literature and most students would be taking one of history or geography. So they've kind of said that just cuts down the overall aim a little bit. So again, as home educators, we'll have picked our subjects a bit more. So you may not be doing those subjects this year, and you may not get to take advantage of that content update, but they've just looked at that whole school package. Another thing that they've done is formula sheets. So in maths and physics, which includes combined science, for the GCSEs, you get a formula sheet, whereas you don't usually. Now for EdXLI GCSE maths, you usually do get a formula sheet. So that hasn't changed this year, but you will be getting an extra one for physics. And again, that's the idea behind that, is it's one less thing that you've got to spend your time memorizing and remembering beforehand, because you'll have those formulas with you. And another part of the package is the way that they're going to be graded this year. And you might have seen the newspaper headlines, and they're billing this as more generous grading. And it is more generous grading compared to 2019, which is the last year that exams were run normally. However, in the years in between, where there were teacher grades, overall those grades were higher, as in more people got higher grades over the whole over the whole cohort, all the students that took them. And then that means the exams that some of us have done in November were graded to match those teacher assessed grades. So the upshot of that is that when they're grading this year and they're talking about more generous grading, they're talking about back to 2019. So it won't be more generous grading than, say, this November's exams or the November exams before then necessarily. So if you're looking at doing past papers, looking at those grade boundaries and trying to get an idea of where you sit, the safest thing to do is to look at 2019 and say, if I look at 2019, then this year there should be a little bit of a safety cushion on that. So, you can consider yourself maybe half a grade or just that little bit more comfortable than a 2019 boundary. But don't necessarily look at a 2020 boundary or a 2021 and think that that grading is going to be the same, because it will probably be a little bit harder to get those grades this year than it was during the November exams. And then finally, we're on to the advanced information, which is the other big part of this whole package of things for the summer. And that's the main one that we're going to talk about today. So move on, Sarah, to my next slide. There we go. So the advanced information, this is what came out onto the exam board websites a couple of weeks ago. And this is for every subject at A level and AS level, and the subjects at GCSE that didn't have any content taken out. So it was only GCSEs. A levels did not have any full-on content reductions. Sometimes they had a little bit of coursework that was easier to do, but they didn't have any whole areas taken out. So advanced information is for everything that has the full level of content for this summer. Now, the idea of advanced information is, it's not to tell you what's on the exam exactly, and it's not to say there's some areas you don't need to cover anymore. So the theory is that it is to kind of focus your revision. So they're effectively saying, they've given you they describe it as the major focus of the exams to help you support revision. And they're basically saying, right, you should learn everything. You should cover the whole content of the course as usual. But then when you come to the areas that you want to work a bit more on and that you want to make sure you've got really completely solid for the exams, if you look at these areas, then they're going to come up, they're going to be worth a decent amount of marks. And so what they've done is they've tried to kind of give you enough information to say, right, if I work really hard on these topics, I'll probably do okay in the exam. Now, what that actually looks like is different for each subject and each board, partly just because of the nature of the exams themselves are different. So to kind of give just a few examples, for instance, English language. And there are some things that they can't really give you advanced information on because it would just allow you to memorize an essay and be done. So for instance, in English language, where they've got a creative writing based on a picture, they can't tell you what that is. And they can't tell you the prompt because, you know, it would mean that the exam then wasn't really very useful. It would just be a case of who's remembered the essay that they wrote before and prepared already. So there's some areas like that where you don't get any advanced information because they just can't do that without telling you the question. And there's other areas where it does tell you the topics that will be covered. Usually just, it can take sections out of the specification and say, right, we're going to do this chunk of specification will be included somewhere. This chunk will be included somewhere. And there'll be some areas that are not mentioned. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean there won't be anything about that topic. It usually means that it just won't be a major, it won't be a big mark question. There won't be a major area that they're going to ask about. So you ought to be able to match that advanced information against the spec and say, okay, these are the areas that I need to cover. There are a couple of specs. I think this probably only applies to Edexcel Sciences, where there are some topics that that explicitly say this is not included. So that's about the only time that you can say, right, fine, I don't need to worry about that. But it's quite a small area because essentially they've written the exam papers as usual, and they are designed to cover as much of the specification as possible. So the information, sometimes you look at it and you kind of go, well, that's just a spec. So that's not actually very helpful. But one thing that can be useful there is that they are divided into paper 1 and paper 2, for instance. So again, nearer the time, you can use that to focus in your revision and say, right, for this paper, I'm going to look at these topics, and then I'll save the other topics for paper 2. So it just gives you that little bit extra push towards what you're going to be looking at. Right, so that doesn't reduce the content. It's varies for each subject and board. Important thing to bear in mind when you're looking at the advanced information is that it won't always be the same topics across the different boards and across the different tiers. So for instance, if someone is doing GCSE maths for Aqua, they'll have had different topics that are going to go into their exam paper than if they're doing Edexcel maths. So the thing to be aware of there is if you see, if you're using something online, like a Dr. Frost maths or a HEQA maths or something, or you've got a YouTube playlist that says, right, this is the maths advanced information. You need to be 100% sure that that's the maths focused on the maths advanced information for the specification that you're doing, because the topics won't be the same. They're not even the same between foundation and higher on the same paper. So the safest thing to do is go and look at the advanced information straight from the website and use that yourself to guide your own topic choice and revision choice. But some of the information, obviously teachers have done that for their class, and they've often provided quite a lot of helpful resources already, but you need to make sure that those resources are for the spec that you're going to be using. Okay, I think that was what I was going to cover, and then Sarah's going to take you off on a tour to actually look at some.
Right, so I'll come back. Right, so my screen's full of tabs open. So Katie's put together this helpful list. Some of this is already available on the exam groups, on HEQA, on the wiki, but we pulled it all together, and when we work out where we're putting the video, we'll link it to it. We haven't got that far, we will get that far. So where can you go to find the information? Well, in the short term, if you haven't got access to this, summer 2022 exam changes on the wiki. Straight there from the top, you can find it. Link there. It was written before the advanced information came out the day before, but it's got all the links that you need. I'm going to say I'm fairly sure it's right because I wrote it. So it should be as close to what we have as there. JCQ have put together a really helpful student guide that summarises it. If your child's nervous about this and isn't sure, you can give them this to have a read. It's written for students. Simple possible terms. So where can we find the advanced information? Well, each of the exam boards have got a lot of information about the 2022 exam changes. So HEQA, you can see it right there in red. You click there, we can go through, you can find changes for your subject. So I think Katie said about the changes for about, I think all sciences say not on. So I spent a while looking at a few the other day just to make sure that I had. I'm pretty sure that, here we go, yeah. So I think the not assessed is specific to sciences, from what I know. I've looked at quite a few and it's the only one I've seen it come up on. When we were told beforehand, we were always told that it wouldn't tell us that, but it seems that they have done for scientists for some reason. So you can go through this way. Click on there and you can find your subject there nice and easily, and it will take you through. Again, Pearson, they've got all sorts of information on their site. I can never find, I just search the site when I want it because I can never find the link directly, but it's there. It's theirs. Now comes, you click on it as a download. You can download all the information in one go. All of them in one folder. Probably more useful for schools that way. But if you're doing a few from the same book, from a few IGCSEs, you can just click on there and download them all at the same time. OCR, theirs is again nice and easy. You click your level. Click a level before I can click a qualification. That's probably one of the most common ones done by home educators. And again, it downloads it. It's important to note that you can't take these documents into the exam. It's all nicely written on it that they don't go into the exam. But they're there for you to print off. It talks you through the advice. It's not just a list of content. It tries to explain what it is, what it tells you and what it doesn't. So it's worth taking the time to actually read the entire document of each one, because as Katie says, every subject and every board is ever so slightly different because the exams are different. There's questions, we'll do our best to answer them. I think between us, we cover quite a lot of subjects that we've looked at and quite a lot of boards. So I think we can cover quite a few. I did make the time to look at modern languages because that was the one that we said we didn't know, but whether I can actually remember much about it, that's a different matter. EDUCAS, probably the least common one done by home educators, but it's there. You can click on it, which subject you're doing, find your level. and it takes you through downloading it. It's also available on each of the specification pages. So the specification pages also have the other changes as well. If you don't use them, it's always worth knowing where to find these. So for Pearson, you click on qualifications at the top, you get to this page. Pick your common qualification, pick your qualification, international GCSEs. Go for maths. I won't click on maths being confused matters. So you can click there to access the subject information, or you can click here and it takes you into the 2022 support for Maths A. So we'll take you to the advanced information. You click here, takes you to more. So actually that's all it is for that one, isn't it? Because there's no formula. I was thinking, oh, it's going to take me to a formula sheet, but it doesn't because it's IGCSE. But
physics will do actually, because there's a new.
I was going to say they've amended the formula sheet, haven't they, for physics?
Yeah.
But yeah. AQA, again, click on qualifications, you get a list like this, and it's got all sorts of fancy ones being AQA, but you can just skim it down to what you need. You can spot all these little things change for 2022. For most of them, it is just the advanced information, but it can take you through business, changes to how it's assessed, and actually it takes you, it takes you to the advanced information. If there's any more changes, they'd be listed there. It's basically the same for every exam board. Click on the qualifications, you get your list of qualifications, you can click on your subject, it will take you through to your subject. And from there you can access the all the changes. HEQA, it's this one, it's worth knowing. You have to make sure that it says, if it's got the teaching in Wales, it means you're on the English page, which if you're sitting the exams in England is good. Let me see. Oh no, I can get into it now. It's been giving me warnings all day. But and then this is, you've got teaching in England, it means you're on the Welsh page.
And if you look up in the corner, it's HEQA is the English one, and it says WGX back if it's the Welsh one.
So I think that's pretty much all I was going to do, is show you where to find it.
Yeah.
If anyone's got any questions, I can bring up a couple of the more common ones.
Yeah, I was thinking, Sarah, if you actually bring up one of the, perhaps an IGCSE information to scroll through.
Shall I look at maths or science? That's one of the most, I've got the maths page open. Let's go for that.
Because actually something that's worth knowing and remembering for the international GCSEs is that they have 2 different papers each year. So on the advanced information, it includes both the local paper and the regional paper. So you need to make sure that we will sit the local paper, not the R paper, the regular paper, normal paper.
It's also worth knowing they have updated some of them since they came out on the 7th of February. Not many, but some of them. Most of the updates are typos and sort of corrections that way. They're not so much changes to they haven't mass changed the amount of topics, because obviously it's the same paper, but there's a few amendments. So if you looked at it on the 7th, it's worth checking again as you start to revise. So yeah, today you got the information on the front. It's printed off. It looks like the start of the question. You got the information. As Katie said, it points out the R version. All the Edit Cell ones have some general advice that explains the advanced information. Then you've got a subject specific section that tells you more about how it relates to your particular subject. And it's important to note for maths as well, not only have you got the R versions, you've got 1F. So it's a specific paper. So this is the first foundation page. So this is foundation paper 1. And the other thing they say is the topics are given in specification order, not in question order. So this isn't question 1. It'd be nice if it was, but it's not. So they can come up anywhere on the question, anywhere on the paper. So you have it split into paper 1, 1F, what else have we got? 2F. So they've got the first foundation papers first. Higher papers second.
Yeah, with maths in particular. So this is a 32-page document, so it can be worth being quite careful about which bits are yours.
Yeah, most of them are not this long by anywhere near.
I think most of them are about 2 or 3 pages. And
yeah,
the English language literally only has one piece of information that's specific to it.
So they've got it broken down into each paper, and then they've got it grouped to everything that you will cover.
Yeah.
So personally, if I was using this is where I would start my revision from. And then as we got closer to the exams, I'd be looking at the papers because there's longer gaps between them now.
Actually, that's sort of, again, one of the things they've done particularly for this summer is they've tried to make sure that there's at least 10 days. And often there's a couple of weeks in between the papers, which isn't always the case. But then the theory is if, for instance, you were in isolation or you were ill for one paper, you'd still be likely to sit the other paper. And so long as you've sat at least 25% of the exam, if you're unable to make a paper on the day, then there's what was called a special considerations process. And that means that they can grade you just based on the paper that you sat. So that's sort of, that's something that's always in place, and they've stretched out the papers so that you're less likely to be ill for both of them.
Yeah, it used to be, certainly you should be able to be much able to predict where the papers would fall. I know I tutor sociology, and it would pretty much always be the Monday and the Friday of the week before half term. But now there's a good 3 weeks between them, so we won't be able to predict them for when people say look at the timetable for next year, you don't have a clue. I suspect they're going to stick with doing them longer.
It does make sense because, you know, if you've got your papers 2 days apart,
yeah,
and something comes up that means you miss one, you're more likely to miss another. So I guess just something they've thought more about now. Yeah,
I suspect that's going to be a long-term thing because COVID isn't going to magically disappear, but hopefully it'll be one of those things that they will put into place to keep exams going.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go back to cancellations. So anyway, to answer a question that's come up in the chat, I know we have done there, but yes, you don't print off this, you don't print off formula page sheets to take into the exam. Obviously, you can print them off to practice at home because they're not in the past, certainly for the GCSE, they're not in the past papers because they've not been, you've not had a formula sheet for GCSE maths in the past, just for the IGCSE. So it's not automatically printed in the papers, but you can go to the spec page and pull off the formula sheet printed off to use for practice at home. But on the day, it will be given to you in the exam.
Yeah, and does anyone have a particular advance notice subject or exam that would just like to have a look at or have us go through? Because if we perhaps look at another one, it may as well be one that's useful to somebody here if you want to put a vote in. But should we have a look at one of the science ones?
Yeah, I was going to say probably the IGCSE sciences are the other big one, aren't they?
Yeah.
So let me. I should just be pulling it off the big folder really, but I'll go for.
It will help show the way around the website as well.
I can navigate them. Actually, what I'm going to.
Oh, and I would say,
I'm going to come out of that and go into physics, because then I can show where you can get the formula sheet as well.
Yeah.
Just for kill two birds. So you click on 2022 support, you can see exam support materials, you've got an equation list. So this is for international GCSE physics and for the double award, because of the way the double award works, would be in the same paper. And then you can see they've got guidance for it, which is a simple. This was prepared before the
if you go back to the main spec for physics, because if you go to the under teaching and learning materials, I think, yes, down the bottom here, the summer 22 support, and this area has got lots of useful information, so it's worth exploring for your subjects anyway. But the PowerPoint that's mentioned support for advanced information, that's actually quite a useful read. That was a presentation I think that Edexcel did themselves, and that's got more information about the advanced information for sciences in particular. So that's just something you might want to look at if this is a topic that you're doing.
So I'll do an awful lot of training materials, and they are mostly available behind their in their teaching resources. I mean, obviously it's not so helpful when you haven't got somebody talking you through it, but they're there.
Yeah, and if we have a look at the actual advanced information.
So again, not allowed to take it in. See, this one's a lot better, 5 pages. So
yeah, straightforward.
bit more normal. So it's probably worth mentioning, if you're not an educational professional, this idea of synoptic questions is, we've been bandying that word around, and if you're not an educational professional, I had to Google, because it's a fairly modern way of putting it. It's a question that means it assesses across the spec, that you bring in different areas. So when we're saying that it might be things might be assessed synoptically, that's what we mean, is that the question won't focus on them, but you might be required to know that bit of information, or that bit of information might help you answer that question.
And it does come up a bit in science, but it comes up more in sort of subjects like business and sociology, where the question will be sort of fairly general, and you're supposed to bring in lots of different types of knowledge. So they're saying, everything in the spec is fair game to put in there, and you should, just because something isn't listed on the advanced information, that doesn't mean you can't use it when it's relevant. It's all part of the content. It's all there to be used. Yeah,
they are they're my subjects that I teach. So they're the one doing the training. It's very clear, is all those stuff's in the advanced information, you will be credited for anything on the spec that you use properly. So it's not that you don't need to know it, or that you can't use it. So particularly if you, for the longer, those sort of question, those sort of subjects, if you struggle with some areas of the what they're saying for the advanced information, you can still don't panic about the marks. They can still be there from knowledge of other parts of the spec. So let me scroll through. So science is unique in the topics not assessed, as far as I can tell. I've not looked at that many of the A level. I looked at a few, but our major concern probably here is GCSEs and IGCSEs.
And I think in general, they've tried to adapt the A levels a bit less. So they have still given advanced information, but they haven't. So for instance, in A level psychology, I know I think there's 3 papers, and there's 1 paper that they haven't given any advanced information on, and only on the other 2, because they're sort of thinking is that the A levels are more important. It's really important that you actually know all of those things for your A level, and then to go on to potentially go on to a degree subject in it. So there've been slightly fewer adaptations in A level than there have been for GCSE. So yeah, this is where it's split into the different papers. And I don't think there's one that pulls it all together. You have to do that yourself between the paper 1 and the paper 2. And the not assessed in this paper, bear in mind that they might be not assessed in paper 1, but they are assessed in paper 2. So before you can sort of say, I'm not going to worry about that, you've got to make sure it is on both of the not assessed lists. And I think for physics, that's just electric charge and stellar evolution.
Cosmology, I noticed, I think. No, it didn't.
Cosmology
it is, definitely.
Yeah.
I was looking at the wrong one. Yeah.
So yeah, don't sort of look at that first list and go,
Stellar evolution, stars, I think is the only thing. There's 2 of them not.
Yeah, electric charge and stellar evolution is not at all. But again, this is something that will come into its own when you're a couple of weeks before the exam. And you think, right, okay, I'll start with these ones. Once these are solid, I'll go on to the ones that are sort of in that grey area. They're not definitely assessed, but they're not on the not assessed list. So they're going to come up in perhaps the lower tariff questions, or there will be something that's useful to me to put into one of the other questions. But effectively, the idea is you start with these topics, you make sure they're solid, and then you look at the rest of it if you've got extra time. And yeah, there's a couple of topics that you realise you don't need to do. For sciences as well, they're listing the core practicals that they're going to include. So there's something like 12 core practicals across the whole of physics, and they will be asking a question specifically about the practicals they've mentioned here. They haven't said this, but I think that means there won't be a practical questions on the ones that are not mentioned. It may still be that you need to understand, if it's so for chemistry, for instance, there's a practical about making a salt. So you may still need to know how to make a salt, but they won't be asked if it's not explicitly mentioned. They won't be doing one of the questions where they say, right, so explain how you prepare a salt, and you've got to memorize all the different steps of it and put those down. So I think that can also cut down. So you need to know the general idea for a practical, but you probably won't need to know it at the level of detail of all the extra steps if it's not mentioned.
Does anybody have any questions about any specific specs or any different types of ones? If not, shall I jump in and look at the ones?
Yeah, look at a sort of a sociology.
I'm going to look at one that matters to me.
Yeah.
Just to give us an idea, because I want to show a contrast. Because the ones we've looked at so far they're basically short mark questions.
Yeah.
So I've seen an example, sociology, which is very much essay based. How this is done. Let me get into the right one. So what they've given us for sociology is actually made me jump for joy. I like this one. Some of the ones I've had, I think there's no point, I'm just going to revise everything. But this one I like. So what they've done for this is, because it's very essay based, they've said everything can come up on the shorter mark questions, everything can come up synoptically. You don't have to revise everything. but we are going to give you the focuses for the essay questions. So how can we use this? This sort of question is for, firstly, I know I can pick out key studies which are going to be relevant for this. I can pick out key information, key statistics that will be helpful to learn for this. I can't tell them the exact question because I don't know the exact question. It was very clear when they were planning advanced information that you shouldn't be able to guess the questions from it. However, what's also already happening on the teachers groups, and what I will be doing more of as well, is for this sort of thing, because the questions are formulaic, I'm going to be writing a list of potential questions, and I will work through them with some of my candidates practicing. So it will help us, we will be practicing our 12-mark questions on that line. So that's one way you can use the information that's of this type.
Yeah, and similarly in GCSE psychology, I've looked at the OCR one because I've got a daughter taking that this summer, and it's got the same thing. There's some of the studies that are mentioned in the advanced information and some of them aren't. So again, they would want to know roughly what happened in that study, but in terms of remembering exactly how that was set up and all of the details of it, you only need to do that, I think, for the ones that are mentioned. And again, you can't guess for sure what the questions will be, but they often have thematic questions, and you can at least practice doing a theme that includes the things that are mentioned in the advance notice, and you might get lucky.
Yeah, it's helpful with these sort of subjects because they're formulaic questions that you can actually make up your own questions, particularly where there's they're marking grids rather than marks for correct answers, so you can apply them to other questions. I think some of the boards are putting out a little bit of extra guidance in the way of topic quizzes or what have you, but I'm not seeing much of it yet.
Yeah.
I'd hope that some of it feeds through. There's stuff out there on YouTube and stuff coming from teachers, but as Katie says, you need to check it's the right spec. And you also need to remember these aren't official exam board materials. These are people like us who have looked at it and are making guesses. Advanced information is something new. Nobody's experienced it before. Nobody really knows what they're doing with it. The teachers, everybody's just trying to work out how best to use it.
Do you want to bring up English language?
Yes.
There's not a huge amount to see.
Because that one's, I have to say I did look at that one because I was intrigued what they did. Yeah. Should we look at spec B? Because that's,
okay. Yeah.
That's probably the...
So I said English, often it's an extract and a question based on that. So it's quite, the question itself is always pretty formulaic, and it's the extract that is the thing that's different each exam. And obviously for unseen extracts, they can't tell you what that extract will be, because then you could just prepare it and it wouldn't be a useful test anymore. So what they've done is they've just picked a section. And there's actually, you've got slightly more information for paper B than you do for paper A, when there's literally just the writing. So there's a writing task, the transactional writing, and I think for English language A, they've said it'll be a leaflet or it'll be a speech, and that's the advanced information that you get for that English exam, because it's all that really makes sense to provide. So again, here, you know this spec a bit more. Do you want to talk through how it?
Yeah. So this one, you get 2 texts, and you get what is writer's effect, comprehension-based questions really for section A. And all they're doing here is they've told you the type of text you are going to get for each. Now what they've done is, I'm not sure where it is on the website. It's on the, I know Katie put a link on the English group. They put information telling you how it links to past questions on previous exam papers, haven't they, for English? There's something there.
Yes, and I think what they did was, so for instance, for the website contribution, the link said, right, these are papers where we've asked a similar thing before. So we've asked for a different sort of a website contribution.
Yep.
And I think they said basically which exam series there were questions that were a website contribution on there. So you can, and for the other spec as well, you can sort of look through and go, okay, so where have they asked about speeches before? Where have they asked about leaflets before?
Yeah, you can look through the past questions yourself, but I think they did put a link there, didn't they, somewhere? I'm going to see, is it there? That's a guidance, isn't it?
No, it was on the forum, the link that I put up.
Yeah, but yeah, if you look on the English group, it's on there, and we can share it on the main exams group. Anybody needs it. I'll have a look. I'll have a look at that locked one later. I don't want to put up my login details. What other thing? Is there anything else, any other subject that anybody wants to look at? How would it work with past papers? So if you've got something like this and you know the type of questions, you can have a look at the past questions and try and pick ones that are relevant. Personally, I think it's worth practicing everything still. For most subjects, I would still be using the past papers as is, possibly at this point. Something like maths, you could look at Save My Exams, places with topic-based questions to pick out the ones on the advanced information.
Yeah, and again for maths, they do usually try and make a pretty good effort to cover most things. So most things do still appear to be in maths. And effectively the way we're using that is we're doing a past paper. And generally at this period, we go through a past paper and then some percentage of it is right and some larger percentage of it at this point is wrong, or they don't know what to do. And then we go through and we pick some of those topics. So if the topics that they don't know at this stage aren't mentioned on advanced information at all, then that's not the one we look at. So usually we've got a choice of 5 or 6 different topics we could choose to focus on, and we'll choose the ones that are on advanced information rather than the ones that are not. And if we get to the end and we're solid on the advanced information stuff and there's still time, then that's fabulous. We'll look at the rest. But it's a question of, if you've got 2 or 3 different choices, you can choose the ones that are mentioned is probably the better option. And again, for the English sections, so again, where there's transactional writing, there's usually sort of 4 or 5 different things that come up. So there'll be write a letter, there'll be do a speech, do a leaflet, do a blog. And again, we'll pick the questions that are going to match the advanced information to practice on. We may still use the others if there's time, but we'll sort of now and closer to the exam, we'll focus in on the ones that are going to be, or that have been mentioned in advanced information.
You could almost make it up section B yourself on this paper, because it's transactional writing based on the first 2 texts. You could just say, well, I'm going to write a website contribution based on it. Look at look at the style of other questions they've asked about website contributions and try and match it to the paper you're doing. If you really wanted to do that, but quite often just writing will help. For the English,
Yeah, I've just found that link and put it into the chat, which links to the Pearson forum, and that's giving you a little bit more guidance on English language B website contribution question.
Is there any other subjects that we want to look at? I think some of them are quite limited. As I mentioned, I did look. I don't know if anybody's doing foreign languages. Let me go into them. I've looked at the GCSE for a change. It's not a vast amount of difference between the GCSEs and the IGCSEs for foreign languages. Into French. There it is. They've suddenly changed the way the page looks this week, just to confuse me. So, well, there's vast amounts of information here.
And something actually, when I was looking at, the package of changes. So one thing they've said for modern foreign languages is that you don't have to know any extra words that are not on the vocabulary list. So I think usually if there's a vocabulary list plus some unspecified stuff from outside that, and they've said this year they're just going to stick to the vocab list. So again, that slightly narrows down the scope of what it is that you need to learn.
Yeah, the advanced notification for foreign languages is quite limited. It relates specifically to the writing paper. I think when I looked at the IGCSE, it was the same. So it is just no information for listening, no information for speaking, no for reading, and even on the writing paper, you don't get information about what the translation is. So it's just a couple of questions. So say some of the subjects are really useful. So I'm over the moon with the sociology one because I think that really helps mine. Business, I may have described it to the head of business as much use as a chocolate teapot because I think it includes 85% of the spec. And of course, everything else can come up as well. So you're just thinking, well, it doesn't really help with targeting it. It would have been nice if you'd have said, well, these are the topics for the questions that are 6 marks or over. But it's a very synoptic subject, so it is what it is. So we will just revise most things and just make sure that we know the topics on the advanced information really well. Other ones are more or less useful. I think citizenship does the same with, it tells you the topics for the longer mark questions, what they call high tariff questions. That's the phrase they use.
They do, and with OCR psychology in their training, they said there isn't, high tariff doesn't mean anything specific for theirs, so it's not even as strict as if it's 4 marks or above. It's included, otherwise it's not. And it could have been a different training as well in sciences. I think they've also said they've looked at the overall amount of marks. So I think in the sciences, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be, if it's on the advanced, there will be included, there will be a 10-mark question about it. It might just be included in several different 2 or 3 mark questions. So they've all taken a slightly different approach. Again, it depends on the subject. It depends on the style of the papers, what has made sense for them. Overall, it's supposed to be, if you know those topics really well, it'll cover the bulk of the marks. But not necessarily everything, and depending on the style of the questions, sometimes they can't help at all. Like in the English language, A1 doesn't really narrow it down very much at all, but it's just the part of the nature of that paper.
Should we pick one more to look at very quickly before the end, and then can we think of anything that's ever slightly different that we haven't looked at? We picked an essay-based one. We picked English, maths.
Yeah, we covered English, maths, science.
What sort of things do we? What the home educators mostly see? Is that history?
Yeah, well, yeah, have a look at a psychology one because that does seem to come up.
So
quite a lot. Do a different.
Well, I don't want an edge test one, do I? Because should we do OCR?
We do OCR because that's the one I've.
Actually, shall I click on classics since I've got that open? I've not actually looked at this one properly. So this is quite. So actually, let's go back and look at I will pick psychology.
So, and this is one where, so the psychology has got separate questions about research methods, and they've said they're not giving advanced information for that. So that's an example of where some of it is getting information, some of it is not. You're just going to have to do everything for that section because it could be anything. So these ones here where they've, and to be honest, psychology is one where it's a good 75, 80% of the spec is just listed here. So it's not narrowing it down hugely, but it has a number of studies and some of those are not listed here. So again, that's where we won't try and remember every single detail of those studies. We'll just get the vague idea in case it's useful for a synoptic question to pull in. So it's quite high level, as in key concepts of all of the topics. The main topics are still on there.
Yeah, I think it shows when you're just saying key concepts, there's only limited amount of information they can give you, really, isn't it? And some of them, without it being. So simple. I think, how can you use it to revise? To be honest, at this point, I'm not using it a vast amount. It will come into its own in the next sort of month or so. I will start really focusing the essay type questions. As I mentioned, sociology is quite good for that. I can use it for that. For the likes of maths, I think I'm just going to use it and highlight the stuff. As Katie said, when you do a past paper, you'll find the topics they don't understand, and then you can compare that topic list they don't understand with your advanced information, and you're going to want to focus your revision on ones which are listed on the advanced information. I mean, if you can revise everything, brilliant, but it gives us something to focus on.
Yeah, and in the week before, when you've only got time to do 3 or 4 topics, again, that's where you can use the paper breakdown and just pick the topics that are most likely to come up because they're in the advanced information. One other thing to point out is that this is advanced information is just for summer 22. It's not something that will, as far as we know, if everything continues to go on the way that they're planning, it won't be in the 23 exam series. It won't be in January 23. However, for the maths and English GCSE resits that are in November, because they're basically considered as part of this series, they will get advanced information the same way as they have in the summer. It'll be different because they're different exam papers, but that's the only time other than summer that we expect this advanced information will happen.
I think that pretty much brings us to the right amount of time. So let me.
Yeah, that's perfect. And if anyone does have any questions later on, so I'm a trustee of HEQA, which is the Home Educators Qualifications Association. We talk to Ofqual, and the DFE and exam boards has kind of been set up over the last year or so just to help explain, the way that home educators do things, the issues that affect us in particular. So if you go to HEQA.uk, if you'd like to join, there's a mailing list where we sort of have discussions about what to feed into those meetings. And if you have any questions that come up after all, you can email me at Katie, Katie, at HEQA, HEQA.uk. And I'll try and get that out. Wherever we'll put this up, we've done the recording, it'll probably go up onto a YouTube channel or be posted in the group or something along those lines, and we'll answer any other questions that come in later on as part of that.
And if you've got any questions, stick them on the exams groups.
Yeah.
Where you can probably guess we're there all the time. I catch the bus. I use my phone on the bus a lot. So if nobody's got any more questions, I'll wrap us up for the night. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you for coming along.
Thank you for everyone who turned up.